Eiffel Tower is one of the most recognizable structures in the world. But while Gustave Eiffel gets all the credit, who ran his household, managed his correspondence, and kept his professional life together while he built it? His eldest daughter, Claire, who gave up her own ambitions to become her father's indispensable right hand. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast, and my guest today is Aimie K. Runyan, author of Mademoiselle Eiffel. Welcome to the Art and Fiction podcast, Aimie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here, Carol.
Let's start off by you telling us about the inspiration for Mademoiselle Eiffel, which of course is about Claire Eiffel, the daughter of Gustave Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower. So, why did you decide to write this novel about Claire?
I was fresh off writing A Bakery in Paris, which takes place in the 1870s. Half of it takes place in the 1870s. And during a period of great upheaval, there had been the Franco-Prussian War, which was devastating. We talked so much about World War I and World War II. We failed to mention the first time that Germany came to cause trouble, back when it was still Prussia, back in 1869 to 70. And then there was an uprising of the people of Paris who wanted to govern themselves because they felt like the emperor at the time was not governing well. And the people of Paris rose up and wanted to govern themselves. And it was a period of great overhaul. It was a great period of great upheaval. That's the word I was looking for. And it showed Paris kind of at a low moment because it didn't go well, unfortunately. But then it was remarkable to me that by even the early 1880s and certainly the late 1880s, which is when Mademoiselle Eiffel largely takes place, Paris was at its zenith. And so I wanted to write something about the Belle Époque, which is the period after the resolution of the Paris Commune, which was devastating. And if you want to learn more about that, please read A Bakery in Paris. And what was more iconic than the building of the Eiffel Tower? And so I knew I wanted to write something concerning that. And I'm like, well, did Gustave Eiffel have any daughters? And at first I thought, oh, maybe the youngest daughter, Valentine, should be interesting to write about. But then I learned that Claire had taken on this role of basically woman of the house after her mother died. Claire was only 14 when her mother, Marianne, died. And it was, or actually, it was Marianne Margot, I can't remember which, sorry, it's been a minute. And Claire took over the duties that you would expect, running the house, taking care of her four younger siblings, and that manner of thing, but also proved her competence to her father in business and other matters. She was the kid that had been allowed to hang out with him in his study and that had basically had an open ear and listened and became kind of the lady of the house from a social perspective, organizing parties that were so important socially speaking, as well as being an important business advisor to her father. And I thought that was fascinating because how many women in the late 19th century were taking that seriously? It's very few. And so I thought that her story was worth telling. And the fact that she is present as a wax figure at the top of the Eiffel Tower, but so little is known about her, so little has been written about her, I was motivated to tell her story.
Oh, I didn't know about the wax figure. That's actually not in the novel, is it? I don't remember that bit.
No, it's not, because that's after the fact. That's fairly recent, I believe.
Oh, is it?
Up at the very top of the Eiffel Tower, where Eiffel had his little private apartment, they call it a secret apartment. It wasn't a secret, it was private. And that was part of the deal, that he got to keep a little office up there. And there may have been room for a small bed or what have you. There was a piano up there, which is fun.
Wow.
And Gounod played the piano. But now it is on, you can see it through a window, and there are wax figures a la Madame Tussaud with Gustave Eiffel, Claire, and Thomas Edison. Because, of course, what nationality is one of the most prevalent to visit the United States, America. And Edison and Eiffel, they got on like a house on fire. They were very impressed with one another. They consider themselves men of great invention, men of great thoughts. And they got to meet at the top of the Eiffel Tower in September. And that's what that scene is trying to depict. Though Claire would have been, the big inaccuracy is that Claire was about 8.5 months pregnant at the time. And of course,
Yeah.
the mannequin shows her in a beautiful burgundy gown that shows off her trim figure. That was not accurate at the time.
Actually, I really like how you talk a lot about the clothing that they wear,
Oh,
particularly
absolutely. It's
Claire's clothing.
fascinating. It's
It is
fascinating because it's
fascinating.
so different from what we wear today. And I thought it was important to capture. We have to move about that where she absolutely had to wear the costume because they're nouveau riche, right? They're new
Yes.
money by French standards. And so she has to dress the part without looking too gauche. Hence the scene where she's looking for used furniture. You want to be chic, you go to shop at Goodwill. That's the whole thing with the Astors never wearing this season's clothing. Never. They would never wear a Worth gown from the season. So gauche. And if you ask somebody who's really well heeled, oh, how long have you had that Chanel bag? Oh, I've had it forever. And that's just
Ah,
how it
it's
is, just
old
how it is.
money.
And so she knew the game to play. She knew the game to play, which was not to look too opulent, but
Yeah.
to look well heeled, but that you've had it for a while. And so she was very savvy. And so this clothing, and there's a scene with her corset. The clothing is her armor.
Yeah.
It
I
is
was
her
going to
uniform. It
ask
is
you
her
about that.
armor.
Yeah.
It is her defense against a world that is not all that welcoming to women. And so, and she's got to maneuver around the world in these restrictive garments. I thought that was worth exploring a bit because they were meant to inhibit women's ability to move freely. Peasant women didn't wear clothes that way because they had to work.
Yeah, I really love the way you talked about corsets because we as modern women go, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing to have to wear a corset. But yes,
Mhm.
for Claire, as you said, she decided it was her armor. So it's how she kind of reframed it. Instead of deciding, oh, this corset will contain her, it will protect her. That was interesting. Where did
Absolutely.
you made that up, I presume? Like you just
Yes. And
decided
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
because she didn't write about her corsets.
No,
A lady of her
of course not.
breeding never would have written about her corsets. And I have poured through so much of her correspondence that exists and the dutiful letters to her grandparents on floral stationery and all manner of frilly dilly things. And of course, the morning stationery with the black band, all that sort of thing. But the corsetier that is mentioned is a real corseting house. And they were innovating corsets that had kind of a spring motion to them that would restrict your frame and give you that pleasing, unnatural hourglass figure with still allowing for some freedom of movement because there are different points in history, and I would wager that the 1880s are a period of naturalism where they're looking, it's contrived naturalism to be sure, but they are after a little bit more of a natural aesthetic. Another period of that was like Marie Antoinette in the later years of her reign, wearing the white flowing gowns like she's a Grecian goddess. And the 1950s were the antithesis. Everything, all the food was plastic and everything was meant to be kind of a contradiction to the hardship and the reality of the 1940s. So,
Exactly, exactly. So also I was interested, really the novel is a lot about invisible female labor, isn't it? And also
oh,
the
for sure.
cost to Claire. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
So Claire knew that, first of all, she valued being her father's right hand woman and she clung to that role. And in fact, when the man who would become her husband, it's not a spoiler, it's kind of important that you know that, Adolphe comes into the picture, she sees him as a bit of a threat because he's a
Yeah.
prodigy. He's very much like Eiffel himself when he got started. He's a young upstart from a decent pedigree, but not super duper wealthy. And her father is just besotted with this guy,
Yeah.
this young prodigy, because Eiffel is the type of man that, above all things, valued talent and would seek it out. And so she feels a bit threatened by this guy. And so I think she thinks that her position that she values so much is threatened. And that kind of, I think, is a contributing factor as to why she decided to marry him because she didn't want, that was clear by that point, her brothers were not equal to running the
Yeah.
family business. And she wanted to keep her tenterhooks and make sure that it stayed in the family through one form or another. And it was probably the means by which she had the most direct control. But through that, she had to concede one of the few rights she had, which was her choice of husband. Because
Yes.
in a genteel family like that, her family was not going to force her into a marriage. Think about the American equivalent with the Vanderbilts, forcing Consuela Vanderbilt into marriage with the Duke of Marlborough. That was considered extremely gauche. The newspapers just reamed Alva Vanderbilt
Really?
for her role in that. They thought it was absolutely inappropriate. So women were, that was like one of the few freedoms that women were expected to have, was at least a large voice in their choice of spouse. Of course, their parents and families would direct them towards suitable choices, but ultimately the choice should largely be that on the shoulder of the young woman.
And what sort
She
yeah.
forfeited that.
Yes, yes, she did, because she really, in a way, had no choice. She really had to marry Adolphe, didn't she? And I think one
Yes.
of the sort of tragedies all the way through this novel, I find, is that if she'd been a boy,
Oh yeah, she
she
would have
would
been
have
the next
been
Gustave. She wouldn't have
she
needed
would have
anybody. She would have been after a woman like Claire,
yeah,
if she were a he, that would have been his helpmeet and helping to bolster the family name and to keep the home fires burning. But Claire was so much more than
yeah,
just keeping the home fires burning. She was
yeah,
helping manage an empire.
yeah. And she
And
had the
and I
brains.
have to say that the dynamic between Claire and Adolphe was largely the workings of my own imagination, because she didn't. There were very few letters between the two of them because they were always together,
I
which is
suppose so.
telling. And they rented rooms at her father's home from her father's mansion on the Rue Rabelais. And so the three of them lived together until Adolphe and Gustave passed away within a few months of each other. And so it was really kind of a trio. And she had split loyalties between the two. And the only way to make that work was to forge one unconventional household. And the house was hers until she died.
Yeah.
And now it's
But
the
it's
Israeli embassy in Paris.
oh, I was just wondering if it was still around. But it
Oh, it
sort
has
of is
been, I think it has largely been destroyed and is now the Israeli embassy. And from the facade, you can't get close. There are very scary looking men with machine guns out
yes,
front.
yeah.
And so, but it looks like the facade is quite different from what I've seen in photos. But I mean, it was photographed extensively in, I believe, the 20s or 30s. And
Oh
the
yeah.
Musée d'Orsay has a lot of those photographs on display that you can see on their website. And so you get a sense of the opulence of the home. But when she was charged with furnishing it, I have a feeling that she looked to estates rather than a furniture purveyor.
Yes. What a loss to the world that Claire was not a boy, as we said earlier. But can you imagine what she might have built herself? Because she was Gustave's daughter. She had his genetics and she had his brains as well.
Exactly. And the rest of her siblings, well, her sisters were very dutiful. They married and, did the
Yeah.
conventional female thing. Her brothers, I think they generally got their lives together. One of them, the younger, married a year before he died, and he spent most of his life unmarried. And then he died the next year, which was interesting. And he was not young. And then her old the Edouard, who features rather prominently in the book,
Yes.
who's a
Good old
real ne'er
Edward.
do well and
Yeah.
described as such in many secondary texts. Though I couldn't find primary sources to really discuss why. I did find a letter from Gustave Eiffel to his father apologizing for some hijinks at school, which I found highly amusing. Yeah, for the, what did he say? The buffoonery at school,
Ah,
which I found highly amusing. There's tension, definitely tension. Edward is a sort of a source of tension, but he married, and I think his wife really was a rehabilitating influence on him. And it happened right around the time his father was imprisoned. They were already married, and so he was already back on the path to the straight and narrow. But yeah, they were never going to light the world on fire the way Claire might have done.
she might have.
And it's the
And now you
burden
talk,
of responsibility that matured her, I'm sure.
oh, absolutely. Now you talk a lot about letters. So it sounds like there was quite a lot of correspondence that was left. So was that all at the Musée d'Orsay? I read that
Yes,
you
the
spent some
Eiffel
time
family
there.
archives were turned over to the Musée d'Orsay in 1981 by
Oh,
Claire's granddaughter,
yeah,
who I
who was
mentioned
a
in the epilogue.
cameo.
And she was a reasonably famous photographer. And she and another cousin or sister, can't remember, you'll have to forgive me. They were the senior reigning members of the family, which is nombreux. And they have a lot of family members. And they turned over all the Eiffel family archives, which were voluminous. You could find menus from the opening, various galas at the Eiffel Tower, not just the grand opening, but when they had dinners or this, that, and the other thing, they kept a copy of the menu. so much correspondence, all the letters that people left when Gustave passed away, all manner of things. And I scoured through everything. And I was lucky enough that I got one day. So my husband and were on a big road trip, and we set aside 3 days for Paris, one day of which I was locked in the archives all day. And that was not terrible. It was amazing. And then they were generous enough to let me back for another 3 days when I went back the following spring. And it made all the difference in the book. And I'd already drafted the whole thing and was able to really weave in a lot more detail. I remember my husband, who's also a historian, he's like, is it really worthwhile going to do the research once the book is already drafted? And I explained that the story's out of the way. Now I can weave in some of the historical elements, and I rewrote things based on things I'd learned. I included a new chapter, and certainly the Panama Canal conflict was the part I felt the weakest about. And so I went to the Bibliothèque Nationale because I was there for 5 full days, like a Monday through a Friday, with a little bit of time on either side. And man, I hit the ground running. It was a great research trip. The first night, I went to the Place des Vosges, which also features prominently in A Bakery in Paris, and got to see Victor Hugo's house to get a sense of a house from that era, and had some amazing French onion soup in a little restaurant there. It was fabulous. And just hit the ground running. And so I spent basically, I think, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday in the archives. And then, what was it, Tuesday and Friday, went to other places, ventured out to their house, like the exterior of their house up on the Rue. It was their house before Rue Rabelais, where most of the story takes place before they moved. Yeah. It's now like an agence immobilier. It's a real estate agency and various office buildings. But the Rue de something or other starts with a P that escapes me at the moment. But I got to see the exterior of their house, which is largely the same. I got to go see the church where Claire and her husband were married. I don't think I ventured out to their house that they had before they moved to the north, because they moved from the kind of the suburbs of Paris into one of the northern reaches, and then down into the beating heart of the city as their fortunes improved. Levallois-Perret, they lived in Levallois-Perret, and there's a Rue Gustave Eiffel up there. And it's telling that there's no Rue Gustave Eiffel closer in town. I mean, there's one right near the Eiffel Tower, but it's small and ornamental. If you look at the Eiffel Family Archive website, they'll say, oh, he was buried with all pomp and honors. No, he was not buried in the Pantheon. He was buried in Levallois-Perret with his wife out in the outskirts of Paris, and which is probably what he would have preferred. But the Panama Canal scandal really affected his image, though he lived for years afterwards. He was a private citizen and basically just doing eccentric research. He worked on radio signals up in the top of the tower. He did some research into aviation during the First World War, where Claire worked and ran a hospital in Switzerland during the Second World War, the First World War. She didn't survive to the second one, which is probably just as well. After you've lived through one, the second one's extreme is a little bit excessive. But she got a commendation from the government for her work running a hospital. So she was just an amazing human being. She just was.
She sure was. What a gift to be able to find someone like that to write about. And then to have all those letters. So you must read French, I presume.
Oh, I have a master's degree in French. So that was also part of like all roads lead to France with my books. Even Daughters of the Night Sky, that's about the Russian female fighter pilot. She ends up in
I love that book. Yeah, I read that book. That was a long time ago. Yeah.
So
no, I love Paris.
All my contemporaries end up in France at some point. It's a space where I feel very comfortable. And I have a lot of fun writing about it. And it makes the research more accessible, being very fluent in French.
Really, really helps. Yes, I am not. I can read French at an academic level, but not very well. I've forgotten it all. Mm-hmm. So the novel centers around Claire, of course, and how she navigates her duties, but there's also a lot about the building of the Eiffel Tower. And there was a lot of resistance to it at first, wasn't there? So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, there's always concern about a large building project because honestly, architects of the time factored in workers' demise as one of the costs, like giving a settlement to their families, et cetera, and so forth, was just part of the cost of doing business. And only one person died in the building of the Eiffel Tower. And it was largely believed to be his own fault. He was showboating on a bicycle on the unfinished Eiffel Tower and fell off. And there's a scene with that. And I did a lot of research to try and get that right, to honor the family of that man who passed away. And because the accounts were all over the place, he was Italian, I believe. And was he married to his wife, or was it his girlfriend? He was married and was a father of 5 kids. And so, yeah. And so some of the depictions say it was a man trying to impress his girlfriend. No, it was his wife. And yeah, it was very tragic, but there were rigorous safety measures in place that were generally not considered typical practice. If you watch something like The Gilded Age, where you've got the rail baron just scoffing at the safety measures, the very basic safety measures that the workers are asking for, Gustave was a man ahead of his time. And so, but of course, you've got he's building it in one of the wealthiest districts of the city, and there's a whole "not in my backyard" sort of mentality.
Oh, yes.
And they didn't want to look at it; they thought it was going to be unsightly. There were a lot of people, and even his good friend Garnier, who helped build the observatory in Nice, spoke out against it, and they were friends. And I'm sure that Gustave found that heartbreaking. And if you look at their styles, if you look at the Opéra Garnier, and he wasn't even invited to the opening of his opera house, oops, even though it bears his own name. And it's short, it's squat, it's classical, it's dark, it's glorious, though. It is absolutely glorious. It is opulence itself. And there's a scene there as well that takes place. And it was just what one did. One went to eat at the Café de la Paix, and then one went to go see the opera or the ballet. And the Opera Garnier, despite the name, was actually really famous for the ballet. And young men would often frequent the ballerinas off in the side. But you take that short, squat, dark, classical style and compare it with the modern, soaring architecture of the Eiffel Tower, and they are counterpoint to one another. So you have the soaring modern architecture with the wrought iron that is the trademark of what Gustave was trying to do. He tried, even in bridges, when he was building bridges and train stations, to make things a bit lighter and open with the heavy bracing and very architectural. Whereas, the Garnier was a counterpoint, an absolute counterpoint. But they came together with the observatory in Nice. You have, Garnier building the building itself, designing the building itself. That was very classical in nature. But then you have Gustave using his genius to create the rotating dome, which was definitely, like space age technology for the time. And, so that they could manipulate the dome to capture various parts of the sky at various points of the year. And it really was a marriage of form and function. I think that Gustave, who had, rhino thick hide, was very hurt that Garnier spoke out against his building. And I found the letter that Garnier's boys wrote to Claire and her family after Gustave passed away. I think they wanted to heal the breach a little bit, because their fathers did respect each other quite a bit, but there was definitely a rift for many years.
Well, yeah, quite a few of the artists at the time were against it as well, weren't there?
Yes, they were. Well, I mean, I'm sure part of it was professional jealousy, because other people wanted the gig.
Oh,
They
yes.
figure, well, if we get it tanked, then we'll have another shot at another bite at the apple.
Well, a lot of the visual artists too, as well, though. Like some of their names escape me right now. I actually started writing a novel myself, set during the building of the Eiffel Tower and the Exposition of 1889. And one thing I discovered in my research is that Gustave wasn't always great to his workers. Now, wasn't there an incident where he actually threatened to fire them if they asked for a raise? Because Claire never
Yeah.
really goes into that, does she?
No, in the space of 100,000 words, it's really hard
Well,
to get into every detail. And I think he tried to be magnanimous most of the time, but I mean, there were times when he had to stick to a budget. And I mean, I'm sure that he had his temper, but I tried to be pretty even-handed with Gustave, because it's so tempting to just paint him as, the villain and the rich white guy who's padding his own pockets, especially when it comes to the Panama Canal stuff, because he made 6 million francs off that venture, and almost 1 million Parisians lost their pensions, their savings, their retirement, because it went bust. But you know what? Gustave did the job he was hired to do. The locks for the canal, he did it. I mean, he accomplished that. Was it right for him to take money for it? Possibly not. I think that he is perhaps complicit, but he is certainly not the guiltiest party. And so I think it was just that he was released from prison, but probably good that he was scared. He was somebody whose ego probably needed to be humbled, because this is happening hard on the heels of the Eiffel Tower, where he's at, the peak of his career. And I think it's okay that he was given a dose of humility, because he basically resigned from architecture after that happened and went into private science.
Interesting though that Claire, or at least Claire is depicted in your novel, always is supportive of him though, no matter what, isn't she?
Yes, and that's part of the reason why I'm pretty mild-mannered with him, because this is through the lens of Claire, who is always going to look at her father through rose-colored glasses. She loved her daddy. It's just the way, she is. And I think that to depict him as a monster through her lens would have been really disingenuous.
Well, and I don't think it was true. I don't think he was a monster. But he
No,
wasn't
he was
always
a
as nice as
typical,
she makes him out. But that says more
yeah.
about Claire, which is important as from a novelist point of view. That's her character, right? So that's important that you did it that way.
Absolutely. And he's probably no more of a villain than your average rich man used to getting his own way, to quote Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, our favorite. Would you like to do a short reading from Mademoiselle Eiffel?
I would. So I'm going to read from the scene where Claire is 14 years old. And this is true. It's true that she went to Portugal with her father, who is going to oversee the last of the building of the Maria Pia Bridge, which spans the Duomo River and connects Porto to the other side. And it was inaugurated by the King and Queen of Portugal. It was a big deal. And Claire went with her father, and this is 2 months after her mother died. Yeah. And they skate back and home just in time for Christmas. And whether or not she organized a dinner for the workers, I can't tell you. But this is how I imagine that she began to rise in her father's estimation, aside from being a heck of a note taker for her father. All right. When everyone had arrived and was seated, we took our places at the head table with Madame Lopez and the foreman. There were waiters hired to serve the dinner, but before they were set about their task, Papa stood and clinked his fork against a water goblet. His piercing blue eyes scanned the crowd, who grew silent in anticipation. Gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to join with you tonight and share a meal after many months of toil on what is and will remain for many decades and even centuries to come one of the finest railway bridges in Portugal, and indeed, all of Europe. You are to be commended for your tremendous efforts. The sweat of your brow, the calluses of your hands, the blisters on your heels are all evidence of the sacrifice you and your dear families have made for the advancement of your nation and the fine people of Portugal. I raise a glass to all of you. Papa gestured to two waiters who were poised, ready to pass champagne to all those assembled. The one nod of the evening to our Frenchness, but hardly one that would be objected to on such an occasion. Papa raised his flute of shimmering golden bubbles to the crowd. Santé, to your health. Santé, the workers and their wives responded in French. Davy smiled, having anticipated the need for French lessons in the week leading up to the dinner. Papa rewarded all of them with a broad smile leading up to the dinner. With a broad smile that had been so rare over the past few months, which in turn warmed my heart to see him genuinely pleased. Indeed, instead of signaling for the staff for the meal service to begin, Papa remained standing. And a word of thanks to our hostess and the organizer of this evening's fine meal, to my daughter Claire. So there you have it. And the evening was a rousing success.
Yeah. Well, as we were talking about before we started the podcast, I really enjoyed that part in Porto. That's a great town, and you captured it very well.
Thank
so I just
you.
want to return to Claire's story, and is it still relevant to women today? I think it is, but what is your feeling about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the classic oldest daughter narrative. I mean, you see the memes like, if you were an oldest daughter who was in the gifted program, how is your three side hustles and your anxiety diagnosis? It's true. Yeah. You learn to balance everything, and then you become almost uncomfortable when anything is taken off your plate, because it's how you function. It's how you function. And so, yeah, I think Claire is definitely the stereotypical oldest daughter, and she has to sacrifice specifically her art. among other things. But she is, at the beginning of the story, a very devoted artist. And how many of us have had to sacrifice our passion for, a day job and kids and a spouse, and and more than our husbands may be called to do. They
It's
might still get
extremely
to
true.
golf 2 days a week or what have you. I mean, I'm not speaking about my husband, who is amazingly involved, but it's true that women are called on to sacrifice more than our counterparts. I'm lucky because I turned my hobby into a job, which is wonderful, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do it. But it is a balancing act that when I go to do events, I'm occasionally asked, how do you balance writing with motherhood, when my male counterparts are rarely asked that question? And it's
Well,
an
men are
important
never asked
question
that.
because it's hard.
Yeah.
But I think that balancing act is something that women are still called upon to do. And the value of unpaid or silent labor, emotional labor, sometimes it's branded, but it's labor.
Yes.
I actually dislike the term emotional labor. It's mental load. It's
Yeah.
mental load, but like emotional labor implies that, oh, it's something that you do because you love your family, which is, I think that's manipulative. And that's something that, I was a public school teacher before I started writing,
Oh,
and, it's an underpaid position, but do you do it for the love of the kids?
yeah.
Yeah. They say that to women who are in that job, so that as a justification for paying them less, when you see men in the same jobs are paid more. They're given more opportunities for like head coaching jobs that pay even more. Like a head football coaching job pays more than the head, I don't know, volleyball coaching job,
Oh, very much so.
despite taking the exact same amount of time. Or speech and debate. I was a speech and debate coach for a number of years. That takes more time. I would trade the number of hours that a football coach has in the fall to the number of hours I was working as a speech and debate coach from August through May. And I was paid less than a head coach for that
It was a
on top of, base salary. And so, yeah, I think that women's labor has been undervalued. And that's something that we're aware of more now, but are not that much closer to solving. And
oh,
my hope with writing historical fiction is to shed a light, I mean, somewhat on how far we've come, which is great, but how far we have yet to go. And, I think that a lot of women who read this book are going to say, damn, stuff has not changed that much since 1889. And it really freaking should have. And that's something that I hope that my readers take with them and can do something about.
yes, because that certainly struck me as I was reading it. Yeah, it's interesting about emotional labor. That, oh, if you love it, it's okay. Because I was a school teacher as well. Actually, I taught drama. Talk about a lot of
Yeah.
work there,
And that is
putting
a
on all the
lot. That, I mean,
productions.
theater is a beast that feeds on time.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. I loved it. But yes, I mean, I still deserve to be paid well.
Well,
Anyway, that
same
was
thing here. I mean, I
yeah,
love writing books, but at the end of the day, like, please send me an advance check.
absolutely.
And please buy the books. And yeah, you can go to the library. That's fabulous. Ask your library to order it. But if you really love an author's work, by all means, go on bookshop.org, support your local independent bookstore, or trot on down to the bookstore, ask them to order it, what have you, and purchase the books of the authors you love. Do not pirate books, because that's how your favorite authors make their living. And very few of us are wealthy. Very few of us are wealthy.
Very few, very few. Yes, it's like the 0.1%. One of my goals with the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other authors. So, what's one thing you learned about writing this novel in particular that you didn't know before?
Yeah, I think that research really makes a novel. And that goes because I've written a lot of contemporary novels of late, in addition to my historical. And I think that the richer the research, the richer the book. And so, for example, my book that's coming out on May 26th, Misconnections, I had a sub agent of my agent reach out and ask me what restaurants I'd worked at in my career. And I said, I've never worked at a restaurant. I've never eaten in a Michelin star restaurant because I'm of modest means. And I said it was hours and hours of research about fine dining and how that whole industry works to make it happen. And so, yeah, I draw from my own experience as much as possible, but, learning about how the Michelin guide stuff works, reading, there's a great book like L'Agence à Table that I had to order from some third party website from Germany for $60 because the book is out of print. And I finally got a copy and read that, like what it's like to be a Michelin guide inspector, and hours of YouTube, which is super fun. Spending
Yeah.
Mother's Day watching about how they catch bluefin tuna, which is like a soup, the most expensive seafood in the world, whilst eating Twizzlers, because life is about balance. So yeah, it's definitely the more the research, the richer the research, the richer the book.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what is some advice for authors on research methods?
If you can travel, do it. Even if you have to live on ramen, that's something my good friend Andrea Catalano says. Traveling to the place is invaluable. Archival
So,
research, when it's necessary, is definitely like never be afraid to ask. Don't hesitate to reach out to museum curators or other experts in the field. Most of the time, they are so excited to talk about the thing they are nerdy about. And I mean, yes, thank them in the book. Ask if there's any way you can compensate them, but a lot of times they are so happy to just geek out with you and to know that there's somebody who cares about their area of expertise. Yeah, so ask. Don't be afraid to ask. That's a big one. And don't be afraid to think unconventionally. If you can't afford to do X, Y, or Z, like I remember writing A Bakery in Paris. We were still under lockdown. It was 2021 when I wrote the bulk of that book. So I couldn't go to France. I was lucky to
yeah.
do road trips here around the States. And so I spent hours on Google Earth and Google Maps, just walking
Walking.
around the streets of Montmartre
Yeah.
and getting a bird's eye view. And when I got to go to Paris the next year, where I was doing research for this bad boy and taking like promo photos for A Bakery in Paris, as well as doing a bit for The Memory of Lavender and Sage, which was my first contemporary novel. My goodness, I got it right. It felt very familiar. And I knew, and my husband, who's got the sense of direction between the two of us, was amazed at how well I was navigating the streets. And it's like, yeah, I've been here. I mean, not in person, but my little avatar's been here, skedaddling all over the place. And I mean, the other thing is, if you're going to go overseas to do a research trip, I got a lot of mileage out of that trip. And I did work for 3 books out of one trip to Paris. So worth the price of admission.
So actually, that reminds me just how productive you are, and you're quite a bit younger than me. So how do you manage to be so productive to put out so many books?
First of all, it's ADHD brain is in some sense my superpower. I hyper focus often. And then there are days where I get in 200 words and it's frustrating. But I have the luxury of being a full time author. I do teach for Drexel University, but that is not all year long generally. Aside from mentoring, it's generally not all year long that I have to teach. I have the benefit of time. I have 2 children who are enrolled in school full time now. They're 13 and 15. So they are off from 7 a.m. to almost, they probably just walked in the door about 3:50 p.m. And so that's a good chunk of time. And I'm married to a man who respects what I do for a living. And he is always very protective of my time. He has a little house in Tucson and he says, "This is your writing retreat." And he waits on me hand and foot there. And there's no internet there. So it's like forced focus.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just finding ways to force the focus. This week, because I am so far behind on the deadline, I've been working 2 hours a day at the library in a study room. And I haven't hit my goals every day, but I've gotten much closer. And I don't have my darling cats interrupting me. I'm not being taunted by the laundry in the other room. And it helps. It helps a lot.
It does. Oh, there's nothing like those rooms in libraries. It's only in the last few
Oh yeah.
years that I've started working in the library, and especially when you really have to focus. Anyway, thank you so much, Aimie, for chatting with
Thank
me.
thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.